Welcome to Security Weekly. I'm Matt Alderman. We are recording live from Derbycon8. Joining me today is John Strand from Black Hills. Thanks, John. And more importantly,
Bryson Bort
from SCYTHE. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, so first I want to congratulate you because you did the announcement a few weeks back on funding, so congratulations on the funding round. I always start with the problem, right? As we think about new technologies coming into the market, I always want to understand the problem that they solve. Can you kind of give the listeners an idea of, where do you see the problem? And then we'll talk about SCYTHE specifically and how you kind of tackle that problem.
Yeah, I think a challenge that really happens a lot for engineers is we all have brilliant ideas, right? But we have them in our own little garages, and we have them in our own little spaces, and we solve some problem that we see, but just because we see the better way to a mousetrap doesn't mean that other folks are necessarily going to get onto that. And we were able to really skip that potential pitfall because 2.5 years ago, Fortune 50 came to us with a problem that they had, and they'd already done the product market research of looking out for, is there something already on the market that they could buy to do what they needed? And what they had found was between all of the assessment and technical tools that they had bought, they'd kind of reached the end of the rainbow where the blue team had quickly just locked in on these are what these tools do, but being defended against a tool is not the same thing as being defended against a threat. And as we've seen the threat evolve and the complexity of that and the size of enterprise, it's really hard to kind of figure out where exactly am I with my controls, both on the people side and on the tool side, the technical pieces. And so what we help do is allow you to programmatically find that level of where, in fact, is my defense across those multiple facets.
So what you're saying is just because I have a vulnerability scanner and an IPS and an IDS and all these other tools, I'm still susceptible, right, to a potential attack. And so there's a gap somewhere in the tooling or the tool sets that the organizations have to kind of figure out where those gaps still might exist. Just because I have the data doesn't mean I'm fully protected.
Well, so it's not only just even like a perspective of a gap. There's kind of a like, what am I getting the best return that I can out of those tools? Look at it from a security operations center. And there's this labor pyramid of I have a lot of junior analysts who are essentially sifting through the amount of alerts that are just deluging this center as it's coming in. And that's because the tools haven't really been attenuated to exactly where am I comfortable to having that level of where I should be looking for things. Because it takes so much effort to be able to, like I said, sort of programmatically dial that in of like, is it here, or is it here, or is it here? Because the traditional approach is very expensive to like being able to pull that in. And so this just is a tool that automates that and makes it a lot easier.
Got it. So from a point of view perspective, what should customers be doing, right? If we know kind of that there's a gap in some of these capabilities, what is it that customers should be doing? Kind of tell me what they should do. And then we can talk a little bit about how you do it. But I'm curious, just tell them, here's what you're missing, right? What is that point of view?
Wait, is this the softball question where I slowly look into the camera and go, this is where you buy my platform?
No, later.
Well, I think there's no silver bullet, right? And one of the things that I think has driven a lot of cynicism in the industry and information security is the fact that we rarely solve anything. I mean, we don't permanently solve anything. What we do is fix yesterday's problem to live to tomorrow, and then we repeat the cycle. And so there's no one answer to how to break that cycle for all of us. And this is why we've seen products and defenses become layered onto each other, because you just continue to need to have more and more and more to handle as the threat continues to evolve. And so there's not a simple answer to that, but the part that we help bring to solve part of that is I have this investment in people and tools that I have made that are giving me some level of confidence of where I stand against risk. And the challenge of quantifying that risk is one that everybody continues to struggle with. And so what we're doing is allowing you to really kind of quantify some level of understanding of, even if I don't necessarily know what the risk is, at least I can have a map to look at quantifying what my defense is.
Got it. So there's other similar products on the market in this area of attack simulation or kind of the space that's been identified. What makes SCYTHE different?
Sure, I'll start actually quoting Ron Gula on the AppSec podcasts with Security Weekly the other week, where he noted that the competition simulates where we emulate. And what that means is what they built is an agent-based approach of here's something that you're going to install at endpoints, and then it's going to consume some input of known things and spit out traffic. And that is a really good way of doing a perspective of technical control. But as a former Army officer, I always go back to where's the people? And if you're not bringing people into part of the risk equation, I feel like you're missing one of the largest components of any enterprise. The other thing that we do is instead of having that kind of signature-based perspective of like what's known, we looked at it from where does the attacker have to go? And if you look at that, once they've gained access through exploitation, they always have to go to the same space. They have to put something down that can talk and that can do things, right? Accomplish the goals for whatever they're conducting that campaign. And so instead of going and looking at like, well, we've identified WannaCry, let's bring in WannaCry. Instead, we would look at something like that and go, what are the communication mechanisms to something like WannaCry? And what are its capabilities of what that can do once it's in your enterprise? And being able to, instead of focus on like, let's find WannaCry, let's find something like WannaCry.
Right.
And
so look at the tools and the techniques, not necessarily the signature in that particular case.
Let's be behavioral based and start looking at focusing on behavioral detection instead of I can find that, because that's only going to be, that has an ephemeral use. Again, it gets me to tomorrow, but then tomorrow they're going to come to me with some derivative that completely defeats my defenses, even though I've just looked for that thing with the old approach.
Right, got it. And so you talk about emulation versus simulation. I mean, I think some of these tools try to replicate aspects of your environment. Give me those nuance of, from an emulation perspective, how is that different from a deployment or delivery standpoint versus what some of the other folks are doing from a simulation standpoint?
Right, so talked about agent-based, right?
Yep.
We're not agent-based, just like you wouldn't say an adversary is agent-based, because at the end of dialing between those communications and capabilities. So when you build up a campaign in the SCYTHE platform, there's really three core pieces to that campaign. There's the controls. I want this to run only in the places I designate and only during the time that I want it to. The communications of how is this going to talk, the capabilities of what it's going to do. And then one of the new things that we just rolled out at Black Hat is the ability to automate the TTPs or the logic of the campaign into the campaign itself. So it will automatically, when it lands in the environment, just start going through that. And those can be anything from it's time-based, like wait a certain amount of time for this command to execute, to building a decision logic of the implant when it lands will look at the environment in a certain way, and based on that, either do this or do that, all of that captured and pulled back into a common dashboard. So that's really that difference of, I'm not just simulating traffic, I'm here as an implant under your control in your environment, working with your environment, and you see that result, which I think that also brings a bigger piece when, again, we're going back to why do we do all of this? The purpose is, what is the impact to the business? And if we're missing business impact, right, this endpoint and this endpoint are not equal.
Right.
Right? If you miss business impact, then how can you possibly prioritize risk and investment and decide what am I going to affect change to react to that?
Right. So based on criticality of the asset, that influences what is more of a risk in your environment than anything else. And so understanding that obviously is how you would ultimately prioritize the results.
Bingo.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
So just on from a values perspective, company says that's great. What's that value that SCYTHE provides back to the customers that are using this product? Can you break those down for me, kind of what those value drivers are?
Sure. So there's been a lot of conversation at Derbycon around the attack framework. And it's kind of like, well, what does the attack framework mean to the security practitioner community here? And the way that I look at it is the attack framework is like the periodic table. We're all chemists, and we all inherently know all of the elements to that. But to the layman, it's an easy way to look at that and be able to understand kind of like how would I create a certain element, or how would I, do some kind of complex reaction. And it's the same thing here, where what we would be able to do is easily allow the business to look at something like the MITRE ATT&CK framework and understand like what are the levels of tolerance from a behavioral perspective, which I think is, again, going back to the purpose of the MITRE ATT&CK framework, of where am I on across that panoply of the table.
Right. So the ability to really consume and do something with the MITRE ATT&CK framework, and even in some automated kind of fashion, right, is really allowing organizations to consume the ATT&CK framework and really understand where they sit on the spectrum, is one of those values that SCYTHE can provide to a customer.
Right. Instead of it being a two-dimensional thing that I'm looking at, let's turn and really understand the depth of what that applies to my environment by operationalizing it with business impact understanding on my production environment.
Right, exactly. Okay. And with that, we're going to take a short break, and we're going to come back and do a quick technical segment with John.